In this video, we're going to take a look at the for iteration statement in Python, which is meant to iterate through a collection of items, or what we would refer to in many cases as simply a sequence of items. So for example, a string in Python is simply a sequence of characters. So one of the things we can do is use the for statement to iterate through each individual character in a string and do something with that character. So let's say we want to declare a variable called character that we'll use in the for loop. So we're basically saying for each character in, and then we give it some string that we'd like to process the characters in. Let's do programming just for demonstration purposes. So for each individual character in the string programming, we would like to do something, and again we introduce the suite with a colon. Indented in the for statement now, let's say we simply want to display the characters. So we'll do a little print statement, we'll display each character as it is picked off from the string programming, if you will. And let's introduce another feature here. We're going to say we want each character to be separated from the next by 2 spaces. So we've provided a second argument here, which is called the end keyword argument, and I'll talk more about that in a few moments, but let's first go ahead and execute this little for statement. So as you can see here, each individual character is separated from the next by 2 spaces in this case. Now the way the for statement works is as follows. This variable name that you define between the for and in keywords is known as the target variable. During each iteration of the loop, one item from the sequence to the right of the in keyword will be automatically assigned to the target variable. Then you can use that value in the body of the loop. So first, when I enter this for loop and start executing it, the letter P is going to be assigned to character. Then the body will execute and I will display character followed by 2 spaces. Then it will come back up into the first line of the for statement, and the letter R in programming will be assigned to the target variable character. Then I can display R, and this will continue for each individual value within the sequence until eventually we finish processing the sequence, which is of course the letter G. When we come back after executing the body in that case, the for loop will recognize that it has reached the end of the sequence and will automatically terminate at that point. Now let's talk a little bit more about this second argument in the print statement. By default, the end keyword argument, as it's known, has the value of a new line character. So you've seen many times that when we went ahead and printed values previously with the print statement, that the cursor automatically dropped to the next line, and then if we did another print statement, more output would happen on the next line at that point. If you don't want the automatic new line character, you can supply this second argument to the print function, and of course you could have a separated list of all sorts of other things before this keyword argument as well. But basically what happens is, if the end keyword argument is present, Python will take the value that you supply as a string and it will automatically use that as the separator between the elements being displayed. So for example, if for some reason you wanted to separate each of these characters by a dash, we could have, instead of using 2 spaces here, used a dash character instead. So you get a lot of flexibility with that end keyword argument. Now there's also another keyword argument where if what you want to do is change how the output values are being separated, you can use the sep keyword argument. So let me go ahead and do a demonstration of that. So let's say we want to display the values 10, 20, and 30. Now if I were to stop right there and execute that, which I'm not going to do yet, recall what will happen here is that it will output the values 10, 20, and 30, each separated from the previous one by a space. Then it will output a new line character to drop the output cursor to the next line so that you can continue doing more output. But what if you don't want a space as a result of displaying multiple items in a single print statement, but rather maybe you want a comma and a space, or you want some other delimiter between the values? In that case, you can go ahead and use the sep keyword argument, which defines a separator string, and let's say we want to use a comma and a space in this case. So let me go ahead and execute that, and you can see that each value is separated from the next by a comma and a space, and then once the last value is displayed, 10, 20, and 30 are the values to display, the cursor drops to the next line. Now you may notice, by the way, that up above here, when we executed snippet 1 and displayed programming with all the characters separated from each other by 2 spaces, the print statement did not automatically output a new line character, but the IPython interpreter's in prompt actually has a built-in new line character in front of it, which is why the in prompt always shows up on a new line every time the next in prompt is displayed. In this case, when we displayed 10, 20, and 30, because we didn't use the end keyword argument, we still get the default new line character, and therefore the cursor after displaying 30 gets moved to the next line, and then the input prompt has another built-in new line character in it, which is why we get this blank line here in the output. Now let's talk a little bit more about the for statement. So as we mentioned up above, the for statement is used to process each item in a sequence of items. Now, one of the most common sequences that you're going to use in Python is known as a list. So let's do a demonstration with a list so we can introduce the concept to you. So let's say that we want to total up the integers in a list of integers. To do that, we might start by declaring a variable total and initializing it to 0, and then adding each item in the list to the total. So let's write a for statement that will help us do that. So for each number in a list of items, a list in Python is defined in square brackets, and I'm going to define a list with a 2 and a -3, and maybe we'll throw a 0 in there. And let's go ahead and call that our list. So we've got 5 integer values in this list, and for each of these items we would like to add them to the total. Now, just as we did up above, we need a colon to introduce the suite. So the syntax of defining a list in Python is simply a set of square brackets containing a bunch of values separated by commas within the list. So the for statement already knows how to process each of those items, each item in a sequence, or what is known as an iterable item. We're going to press enter to now create the statement that will add each of these to the total. So total gets total plus number. So for each number, I want to add it to the total and store the result in total. And we'll show you the plus equals operator subsequently in this lesson as well, so that we can shorten this statement. So at this point, I'll go ahead and press enter and enter again to execute that statement. And now total contains the sum of these 5 values. So 2, and then we add to it a -3, which gives us -1. We add 0 to that, so we still have -1. 17 gives me 16 total because we have to subtract the 1, and then we add 9 to that to get a total of 25. So there is a simple example of iterating through all of the items in a list. Now, as we move forward in Python, you're going to see several different sequence types. We've now shown you 2 sequence types, strings and lists. We'll also introduce another one called tuples as well. And as we work our way through, you'll see that all of these different sequence types are used frequently throughout Python programming. So the last thing I want to cover in this particular video is the range function. Some of you are coming from other programming languages where you're used to potentially having a for loop that can perform counter-controlled repetition or iteration, where you know in advance, I would like to iterate, let's say, 10 times and do something. So let's create a simple example of a counter-controlled loop, but using sequences in Python. So the way we're going to do that is by using the built-in range function. So you remember there's a lot of built-in functions in Python, and we're going to introduce range here, and then we'll look at it in more depth a little bit later. But basically the range function will produce for you a sequence of integer values. So if I go ahead and say for counter in range, and let's say 10, I would, whoops, I spelt range wrong. Let me fix that. There we go. For counter in range 10, I want to do something. What's going to happen here is the range keyword, or the range function rather, is going to produce the sequence of integer values from 0 through 9. So 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 9. And for each of those items, we can do something. In this case, let's simply go ahead and display the values. So we'll print the counter value, and let's use the end keyword argument to put a space between each one of those so that we print them all out on one line instead of vertically one line at a time. So I'll go ahead and execute that, and there you can see the range of values that was produced by the range function. So whenever you need to do counter-controlled iteration in Python, this is the typical type of statement that you're going to implement.